Recently in Korea, there have been many cases with similar details. The victims all died in explosions. Even their bodies were difficult to identify. The special thing is that the victims were all related to a transnational drug trafficking organization. This organization was linked to the Chinese. They produced and sold drugs between the two countries. The police had to work very hard to find them, but they still had no clues. The only thing they knew was that the leader of this organization, a Torwer, was named Lee Sung. As for who he was and what he looked like, that was still a mystery. A police officer named Wanho had been chasing Lee Sung for 2 years, but he had not obtained any information. However, Wanho never intended to give up because he was known to everyone as the most prestigious person in the anti-drug police team. Wanho had never been afraid of any criminals. Once someone makes Wanho suspicious, he will follow that person until that person dies. But the criminal Wanho investigated this time was not like previous ones. He was behind the operation of a large-scale drug production and trafficking line, but Wanho could not find any information about him. Although the police had grasped the important people in the criminal group, the name Lee Sung was still a mystery. He was like a ghost that did not leave any traces. Wanho went to the addicts. He wanted to find clues from them, but he could not collect any information. Before Wanho could thoroughly learn about the drug trafficking line, someone died. It was a very young girl who was heavily addicted to drugs. What made Wan confused was that before he could get information from that girl, someone killed her to cover up the clues. That incident made Wanho always torment himself. If he hadn't taken advantage of her, perhaps the tragedy like now wouldn't have happened. After that incident, Wanho was always haunted by the girl's death. Therefore, he was even more determined to catch Lee Sung. Sure enough, luck smiled on Wanho afterward. Gradually, Lee Sung was revealed by his own people. An explosion occurred at a factory that was said to be a drug production site. At first glance, everyone knew that someone intentionally created the explosion to take revenge on each other. Before that, a CEO of a transportation company was murdered. What was special was that that person was an important member of Lee Sung's organization. No one understood why he was eliminated while he had earned a lot of profit for the organization. Wanho learned this from another member of the organization. Sarah almost lost her life in a recent factory explosion. She claimed that the explosion was for her, but luckily she was still alive and sitting there telling the story. What Sarah knew was indeed strange to Wanho. However, that information did not help him in solving the case. The bottom line was that Lee Sung was conducting a purge in the organization to replace everything. Many people who knew a lot about the organization had been eliminated, and no one knew who would be next. Sarah's purpose in revealing everything was so that the police could protect her from Lee Sung's hands. Lee Sung's hands could reach every corner. Even the police station was no exception. Therefore, there was no place absolutely safe for Sarah to hide. Lee Sung could attack Sarah at any time without the police knowing. Lee Sung was a true devil. He sacrificed many lives just to eliminate one person. No one knew what he would do next. But now Cho Won-ho's savior had appeared. There was a young man who was lucky enough to survive the explosion at the factory, but he refused to say anything. It turned out that his mother was also one of the victims who died in that explosion. No matter what Cho Won-ho tried, the young man refused to open his mouth. Wanho knew that this person knew something about Lee Sung, so he was sure that this person would be helpful in the investigation. It was a young man named So Hwan. He worked at the drug production site that had just caught fire. So Hwan was in charge of transportation and dealing with customers. Sometimes he even became a messenger between the manufacturer and the merchants. In order to get So Hwan to open his mouth, Cho Won-ho had to ask for help from a dog. When Wanho arrived at the scene of the explosion, everything had been completely burned. There was nothing left inside that could be used as evidence, except for a dog lying there gasping for breath. The dog was lucky not to lose its life, but it was seriously injured. Although it was just an animal, it was one of the only remaining pieces of evidence of the explosion, so the police tried to treat the dog to save its life. Their actions moved Seo Hwan, because that dog was his only friend. From Seo Hwan, the police learned about the drug organization's modus operandi. They realized that there was not just one Lee Sung, but many different people, but they were all fake, because they only wanted to take advantage of Lee Sung's reputation to make a profit. For that reason, conflicts often occurred within the organization. Therefore, Lee Sung carried out a purge to renew all the employees. However, Lee Sung did not expect that So Hwan was still alive, and he knew more than Lee Sung thought. There was a business negotiation about to take place. Lee Sung's people would meet a Chinese drug lord. Tianlong and his wife are crazy people. Their purpose in coming here this time is to meet Lee Sung. They have new materials to exchange to produce better products. But since no one knows what Lee Sung looks like, this is the time for Wanho to infiltrate the drug trafficking hidden ring. Wanho will use Tianlong's identity to observe how they operate. From there, Wanho will find out who is really behind the scenes controlling this entire ring. Having Seohwan with Wanho will create more trust. From the other side, Wanho will pretend to be Tianlong. Wanho will come to negotiate with Lee Sung about this new product, but the one who appears is definitely not Lee Sung. Because he is a careful person, he will never appear if he is not sure. The subordinate that Lee Sung sent is a scary person named Baek Jin. Baek Jin has a hobby of playing with other people's lives. He only stops when the victim can't take it anymore. Seohwan was disgusted by Baek Jin's brutality. To make Baek Jin trust him, Wanho prepared a special scene for him. Wanho had to attack his own colleague, even though he didn't want to do it. Wanho had to prove that he was really a madman, so that Baek Jin wouldn't suspect. Only Baek Jin didn't know Wanho was a fake. Everything went through the messenger. Seohwan had been in Lee Sung's organization for a while, so he understood very well the relationships between the people there. To make Baek Jin trust him more, Seohwan forced Wanho to inhale drugs. In front of him, Wanho didn't hesitate to act until the end. The reason Wanho was able to act so well was because Tianlong had taught him how to become a madman. Wanho went to see Tianlong in the guise of Lee Sung, but he was quickly suspected by Tianlong. Wanho was almost discovered by Tianlong's wife. They were all long-term drug users, so their nerves were no longer clear. They were always high on drugs, and they always did things that were not like normal people.
내가 장미?
It was Tianlong who taught Wanho how to use drugs like drug users. It was just that Wanho had only seen it once, so he could not imitate Tianlong. The negotiation was considered complete. Now they needed a source of goods for the next transaction. This time, the quality of the goods would determine whether the following business deals would be successful or not. Right after the old factory burned down, a new factory was established. It was run by two people who were mute from birth. They were close colleagues of Seohwan. Since only Seohwan could communicate with them using sign language, they became close to each other. The three of them were raised by Seohwan's mother since childhood. The three of them held a small funeral for her. Meanwhile, Wanho had to invite an interpreter. He wanted to know what the two mutes were talking about. Although these two were mute, they were both smart and cold-blooded. The fact that they were assigned to manage this factory proved that these people were very capable. The large quantity of goods that Seohwan brought was a simple matter for them. From here, the police also discovered the crimes of the people behind the drug production. The people here forced the unfortunate children to work for them with the purpose of making it easier to order them around. Moreover, these children did not know how to ask for or run away. In this factory, there were all kinds of modern machines. They served the work of producing and preparing drugs. Although the workers here are young, their skills are very high. They have been trained systematically, so their productivity is very efficient. It didn't take long for the factory to complete the order that Seohwan brought. At this moment, Baek Jin appeared at the factory with his men. However, the person who came later really surprised everyone. He was the son of the deceased CEO named Brian. Brian always thought he had the ability to control other people's psychology. He had caused many murders before, but all of them were handled as if nothing had happened. The case of Brian's father being murdered unexpectedly had the same details as the previous cases that Brian had caused. Based on the information Wanho had, he suspected that Brian was Lee Sung. He was not only someone who always acted smart, but he was also cold-blooded. Even Baek Jin was looked down upon by Brian. All of these things prove that Brian was Lee Sung, but because Seohwan had shown disrespect to Brian earlier, Seohwan fell into his sights. Brian ordered Baek Jin to eliminate Seohwan because Brian did not like his attitude. However, because Seohwan was a very capable person and the two mutes could only communicate with him, Brian decided to keep him until the mission was completed. Therefore, Wanho's side had to take advantage of the time to capture Lee Sung. They had prepared everything to act. However, Wanho did not know that his identity had had been exposed from the beginning, Tianlong had discovered that Wanho was a police officer, and he had no intention of letting Wanho go. It seemed that Tianlong had just used drugs and was in a state of losing control. Wanho understood that if everything was exposed, everyone's efforts would be meaningless. His wife also died from using too much drugs. However, Wanho did not know that his teammates were in trouble. At the drug factory, a few strangers suddenly appeared. The loss this time was too heavy, so Wanho could not bear the responsibility to his superiors. He had no other choice, so he had to bet everything on one last game with them. Everything that happened was partly related to So-hwan. Baekjin also didn't like So-hwan. It seemed that So-hwan had made enemies with quite a few people in the organization. However, So-hwan always kept a cold face because he had nothing to lose. The meeting between Brian and Wanho took place under the identity of Tianlong. The meeting place was a large-scale production facility. This place had a lot of modern technology. Brian immediately realized that Wanho was an imposter, even though Wanho hadn't revealed anything. Brian was a suspicious person, so he didn't trust anyone easily. Moreover, Wanho kept provoking Brian. This made Brian angry and wanted to deal with Wanho on the spot. When Wanho woke up, he discovered that both Seo-hwan and Brian had disappeared. At this time, a shocking truth was revealed. The ones who caused the gunfight were the two mutes. Brian was in their hands and was being tortured. The one behind the command of the two mutes was Seo-hwan, because only he could speak to command them. Seo-hwan's true identity made Brian panic. It turned out that Seo-hwan was an unfortunate child who had been abandoned since childhood. His parents passed away after overdosing on drugs. Since then, Seo-hwan hated drug dealers. The reason Seo-hwan infiltrated their organization was because he wanted to destroy them from the inside. The previous purges were all caused by Seo-hwan. In other words, Seo-hwan was the real Lee Sung. Seo-hwan hated Brian very much because he caused the explosion at the factory. The explosion took away Seo-hwan's foster mother. She was also his only relative. Moreover, Seo-hwan's most beloved dog was also injured by the explosion. Therefore, Brian will have to pay for the pain he has caused others. At the same time, Wanho also realized what he had overlooked for so long. When Wanho talked to Seo Hwan's dog, he realized that the dog's name was the name of the drug that the drug organization had just made. It turned out that Wanho had been deceived by Seo Hwan all along. Seo Hwan was the person Wanho had been chasing all this time. From the beginning, Seo Hwan was very enthusiastic in helping the police find Lee Sung without any demands. Seo Hwan had intended to use the police from the beginning to help him get revenge. Indeed, those who remain silent are always the most dangerous. That's why Seo Hwan is not afraid when he stands before any criminal, because he is always the one in control. Seo Hwan did not expect that no matter where he hides, Wanho will find him, but Wanho has no right to arrest Seo Hwan because everyone thinks that Lee Sung is Brian. Brian himself admitted it, so Seo Hwan is completely innocent. The police have no way to charge him, but if the law cannot convict Seo Hwan, Wanho will do it. Wanho judges Seo Hwan on behalf of those who died because of Lee Sung. A decisive shot ended everything. In the end, those who do bad things cannot avoid being punished. Today's movie ends here. See you in the next videos.